Hey everybody, this is Cindy Allen, Editor-in-Chief of Interior Design, and today I'm catching up with two top talents, and good friends by the way, who design everything from residential to hospitality. And we're going to talk about designing mindfully and how material choices really do impact wellness and sustainability. Another friend joining us on this conversation is from StoneSource, a resource these designers know and love and have specified from for decades. Oh, and later we're going to reveal a new product and get their take on it. All right, this is going to be fun. We have from the East Coast, my dear friend and a one-of-a-kind talent, Shamir Shah. Hi, honey, how are you?
Hey, Cindy, so nice to see you. How are you?
It's great to see you too. Then we head over to the West Coast to another great pal and a super talent, Jennifer Johansen. She's the CEO and president of EDG Interior Architecture and Design. Hi, Jennifer.
Hey, Cindy. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Hey.
And then we have Ron Solano, vice president, product development and procurement of StoneSource. Hi, Ron.
Good afternoon, everybody.
I'm so glad you guys are such a group. I can tell already I'm in big trouble. All right, Jennifer, we're going to start with you because you've had an illustrious career. It's always been about like big hospitality because EDG is a giant firm. But hospitality is all about the experience and those kind of personal touches that make a big impact. And I know that even in your own offices, you've been using stone to have a graphic element.
That's right. Tile, we're mostly a hospitality firm that specializes in food and beverage. So full hotels, food and beverage is a strong core of ours. So always looking for cool surfaces that can withstand the abuse that a restaurant puts on it is something that we're looking for. And of course, speaking of abuse, we put it to test in our own kitchen at our studio.
I saw that.
And that was super fun. We were looking for a pop of color and used, not because I'm from Texas, but we did use the Tex product, the hexagonal product there, and got a pop of color and a lot of fun. And all of our clients see it. And, you know, we're always looking for color in our ways to differentiate our projects from each other. And, you know, every now and then we get a project that wants to be sort of modern and clean and minimalist, but usually we're looking for something with more character, something to really telegraph a story and a narrative. And StoneSource has just such a wide range of products that help us out with that. It's really great.
Yeah, and Shamir, so you know what's really great because I published you all, and the work definitely has different viewpoints. Shamir, you've been known for a big portion of your career for like super sophisticated residential work, and then it's grown, and now you have a reputation for this whole residential development, which is more commercial and kind of hospitality driven, and it creates its own set of challenges, hasn't it?
It definitely does, Cindy. You know, you've taken us down a sort of a little bit of history here, but we've been working with StoneSource for sourcing product for about 3 decades now, and we have seen the shift away. I shouldn't say it's a shift away because we continue to do the private residential work, but while we're doing that, yeah, we have been called on to do larger development projects, and it's gratifying in that you're producing. It's the closest we will come to producing mass market housing, which is really appealing to us. But also, you know, you're now producing work for a much wider audience and have to scale back on the palette a little bit, but still produce a product that is, you know, appealing and current and has like a wide appeal. And yeah, they're two different categories with what one would think is a very has a lot of crossover in the work that we do between the two.
Yeah, well, you know, residential so intimate, right? And then you're going into something much bigger where people are experiencing in a similar way to hospitality, but you don't know those people.
Exactly right. Yeah. So we're doing sort of public spaces that have, you know, a much wider appeal, and then we're taking them into their own homes. The difference being that we're not talking about people's, you know, personal living style anymore because we're dealing with a wider audience and has to have a wider sort of appeal. So yeah, they're very different in that regard. There's no one client we're dealing with anymore, and it's the hypothetical client that we're doing, you know, 50 or 100 apartments for. Exactly.
Right. Exactly. And Ron, I imagine that it is, look, there are a lot of challenges and you're always trying to figure out a puzzle with designers like Jennifer and Shamir, but it's also like a big honor too, because right, they're imagining things that you're making come to life.
Yeah, it's probably the most fun, obviously, that we have. And for me, I'm always a little bit behind the scenes. So while I know everybody, right, and you hear the names,
Right.
it's like, I'm kind of like making sure we put all the stitches together. But yeah, I mean, listen, the wonderful, wonderful projects, they work really well with us, and you know, again, honored to be involved and continue to grow our relationships. Yeah.
I want to, just for the viewers out there, I'd love to do like a little tour of some of your faves and or latest projects, Jennifer and Shamir. So I'm gonna name them and then you just give me a tidbit or two and we'll kind of go back and forth a little, just so everyone gets to know you. All right, so Jennifer, we're heading to LA. I know you just recently finished the Viceroy in LA, which is a big project, huh?
Well, it was really cool. I mean, I told you guys, it was when we first started the project, we said, wow, this is a little intimidating. It's a classic Kelly Wearstler design, first kind of outdoor living room kind of hotel that really changed the scene and set the tone for that whole Hollywood Regency style she was exploring at that time. And we all loved it. It was influential to us. So whenever you get called in to renovate a project like that, you're just a little bit humbled. Like, how do we start? How do we reinvent this thing? And we didn't want to just redecorate it. You know, we wanted to really reinvent it at its core. And we came up with a persona that was the grandson of the original matron of the Viceroy. And she had handed the keys to him and he brought in his next gen philosophy and his style and sort of deconstructed it and took it apart a little bit. And there's some residue of the former design. Like we left the bathrooms completely as is, sort of like a time capsule, which have these amazing tiles. But it was a really fun project. It was fun to look at what Santa Monica's done in the last 20 years and how to reflect that in the design, and excited to share it with you guys.
Yeah, and you used some beautiful slabs, didn't you?
Oh yeah, beautiful slabs and some really great sort of encaustic looking tiles that have fun colors that reflect sort of the, you know, multicultural heritage of LA, and along with really amazing mural graphics. So we needed the tile to kind of, you know, just keep up the pace with the color we were trying to interject. So that was a really, really fun project.
Yeah, I know you're shooting it shortly, so I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, I'm really excited to share with you.
Shamir, in terms of your residential work, I think, like, I always think of the kitchen and the bath and those bathrooms and the stone. Like you really are like a stone addict, right?
We love stone, and we've been using stone, you know, for 3 decades now. We've been doing this, and it's a really wonderful process because we start out with an idea for where we want to go with the project, but ultimately we end up with the client at stone yards, picking the individual blocks of stone that make these projects really exciting. We've done some fairly extreme things with Stone Source. We were doing a project for Extel and starting work on a sales office. And we went out to the yard here in New York and went through about 200 or 250 slabs of travertine to find the right product for, you know, the project we were working on. And, you know, it's always great fun to get out and actually pick the stone when we get there.
Yeah, I've seen some book match projects that are just like jaw-dropping.
And the great thing about working with a firm like this is that they are also able to customize for us. So where we might see something that we like, but we want to add another layer of finesse to the project, Stone Source has gone and changed textures for us on the face of stone. So, you know, they'll bush hammer a project or a surface or brush a project for us to get the right look that we were looking for at the time. And yeah, it's always, yeah, it's a nice way to do these projects.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, we have a few more. So Jennifer, I saw some great pictures of Clancy in San Francisco and talk about graphic and fun and sculptural.
Yes, that was a really fun project because it's probably a little different on the price point of going out and finding book match slabs, converting a courtyard merit to an autograph Clancy. But we wanted to infuse as much personality and exuberance and style as we could and really reflect that eclectic character of San Francisco. And that's where all the great textures of Stone Source really helped us. We had these customized concrete panels made that covered these huge walls. We had to kind of wedge our design in between. And so we came up with this idea of the back alleys of San Francisco, which is where really all the cool stuff happens. And the bar is kind of wedged in between these concrete pylons, and it sort of it explores that notion of the back alley. And one is covered with this beautiful brick, and one's covered with the concrete, and then the tile sort of floats in between. And using their textured ribbed tiles in these fun poppy colors really helped really make that stand out. In the coffee concept, we used the puzzle tiles that are really fun and very graphic. And so we're really excited about that project. I mean, it opened in September in COVID, so it's really hasn't been revealed yet to the world. So we're excited to share that. And
yeah, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Shamir, let's talk about 72 Madison, where I know there were a whole other set of challenges with working with the developer, even in terms of budget and how you resolved that.
Yeah, that was an interesting solution for that project, Cindy. We were working on a subterranean pool with no natural light, and it was a difficult space to work in, exactly for that reason. We started out working with a stone that we really wanted to use on the project, which they carry these beautiful slabs of what they call zebra gray limestone. But we found that it was going to be unaffordable for the entire, to clad the entire pool in this stuff. We have the pool of the project looks into a yoga studio and a gym, and we were carrying this material through the different spaces in this sub-cellar on Madison Avenue. So what we did is we paired this fairly expensive limestone with another product from them, which was a split face limestone at a much lower price point in smaller format, and then used the zebra gray limestone on the piers, and then washed the walls of the split face limestone with light between these piers. And it came to life, and it worked beautifully, and it was a great way to get some of the higher end material into the project and still keep part of our vision sort of alive there.
And you wouldn't know, like, you see that that pool, it is absolutely stunning. You're so clever to figure out a way, and you sort of like keep it from the developer too, right? You're like, we got this.
Yeah, it really worked well, and the interesting thing about that project was that we started out showing him these baths in Laval in Switzerland, and the idea was that we would work with a very low light level in that project because we didn't have any natural light, and rather than trying to flood the spaces with artificial light, we kind of went with a sort of dark, moody feel, and it worked quite beautifully. It's a very restful, calming space to get away from the streets of New York, and so we were happy with the outcome.
Yeah, and that's also like when we think about wellness, and it's so wonderful to see these projects where they're incorporating pools and spas, and you're able to also skin it in a way that makes it feel very high end. I know that Jennifer, I know this project really well, the Andaz in Scottsdale, because we did a whole conference at the Andaz there, which was amazing. And you have this like really nice, it might be a little bit of a West Coast hand, but also this just like very natural vibe, very nature inspired, and you see it in the Andaz. And I know you did a spa there too at the Palo Verde, right?
The Palo Verde spa was one of the more fun Stone Source projects we used. Ron, you have to help me with the name of it. I can't remember, but it's a large format tile that looks like little hatch marks all over the floor, and it makes this really beautiful pattern. It looks almost like sand. And
yeah, the fossil. And I think that was the one. Yeah.
So excited. That was one of the times when we all fell in love with that tile. it's porcelain, which is a good solution for this project in a large format. So it had a really soft look. And that was one of the times when the contractor said, oh, we can't get that tile in time. And I said, I'm laying myself down and tying myself to the front door. This project will not open without this tile. We'll just do concrete until it shows up. I mean, I had to go on like bananas with the client to make sure we got it. And you know, Gary, trust me. So he's like, okay, fine. What is this tile? And I showed it to him. I mean, it's one of a kind. You cannot replace it. And so we got it, which
Ron, look what they're doing to get,
lay down my life.
Oh my God.
It's great. It's great to be challenged, and it's great to find things that allow architects and designers to do their thing, right? I mean, that's the satisfaction for us, or for me personally. But for us as a company, you bring products, here's what we think are the best things, and do what you want with it.
Well, clearly Jennifer thought that was the best and only thing. And she's lucky because she also had a developer. He really loves design, and he was such an advocate, which is fantastic. Shamir, I wanted to mention one more project before we get to the new product, and it's 10,000 Santa Monica, which was an absolutely incredible residential development project, right?
It was. That was a really great, fun project to work on, and it was an interesting thing for us, Cindy, because we were called on to do only the public spaces on that project and not any of the actual apartment interiors themselves, which were handled by the base building architect. So it was really an interesting exploration for us, working in Los Angeles with a lot of indoor-outdoor spaces, and allowed for some really great, interesting exploration of new materials that we hadn't necessarily worked with before. It was also a project where we combined, porcelains with natural stones, and something that we hadn't done before. And we found that in the public spaces for that project, where we did have this indoor-outdoor exchange, it was really nice to have the two materials working together. The technology has come such a long way, and they are indiscernible in so many ways. Now, we're not trying to fool anybody by using a product that is not stone and calling it a stone. But when you have the two to work with, I think it enhances the project a great deal. And also, I just think it's better for the environment.
And I think it was interesting. You were talking to me about the fact that, look, you love stone, but with everything that's going on right now, clients are worried about how things are staying germ-free and cleanable. And you said to me, you told me, some of your clients are asking for other things, and it actually pushes you as a designer as well.
It does. We're working on a house in San Francisco right now where our client didn't want to deal with the issue of putting a bottle of cosmetics down on a bathroom counter and having it bark. And we've, for the most part, had clients who are willing to deal with a little bit of maintenance to have the products that we're pushing, and that they seem to sort of appreciate and like. But yeah, this has been a new experience for us, and we found really beautiful materials to work with that are going to work just fine in this instance. So it's a nice gear switch for us, and we're still, it'll be interesting to see the project done, but we probably use less natural stone on this house we're doing than on any other project we've ever done, and it'll be an interesting sort of end product.
Yeah. All right, before we get to the tile, I do want to mention, Jennifer, you were telling me, because we have to mention it, that you're finishing or just finished a mid-century modern hotel. There's got to be some cool stuff that's going to be in there, right?
That project is one of the ones where we have all kinds of natural stone, beautiful natural stone, because it's up in the trees with 10,000 oak trees around it. And it really explores all kinds of connection to the land and done through a really modern lens. So it's very cool.
I can't wait to see that one.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Stone Source sent everybody some samples of a new tile. And I have to say that I feel like you guys, like as an editor, I get so excited to see a new product, and I get to cover it in the magazine and or online, but you guys get to specify it. So first of all, Ron, this is like a very interesting story because it speaks to what's going on right now. It speaks to clients and designers' needs to want something that's more sustainable and more wellness. And there was just such a lovely story behind this, if you could share that with us.
Yeah, I think it is a wonderful story. And you know, we're in the category in most cases with porcelain tile and natural stone that kind of is a good product, no VOCs and those sort of things already, right? Kind of built in just because of what the product is, low embodied energy, which is definitely a buzzword in the last year or so. And this product, La Pietra Compactata, I actually met them on the last day of my last trip, February of 2020. Before, like 3 weeks later, we were all done traveling. And it was a great story that I thought to myself, I just didn't get to see enough. But the Zaccarini family, basically the father had this business where he was just making pavers. So they produce in the Modena region, which is the heart of the ceramic tile industry. But when he started the business, he was like, I don't want to make a porcelain tile, right? I'm interested in green. I can do recycled products. I don't need to have a factory. You know, he stares at the waste and exhaust, you know, in the town. So really for him, even in the beginning, it was really important to him to kind of be one with nature, and that's kind of his MO.
Yeah.
But they were making very basic pavers,
Right.
but they use ground porphyry, quartz, and granite, and they basically press the product, so it's not fired, right? So that's kind of the cool story, and that would obviously really interested me, because we always look for sustainable products, and in many cases when you find them, if we're being honest, they're not that attractive. And so this obviously had this abundance of colors, the sustainable story. On top of it, his two children, Federico and Francesca, basically kind of took the company along and got into all these colors and doing more sizes and shapes and making mosaics and kind of moving it forward. But they all also, in the same vein as the father, I mean, their comments to me is like, we have to exist in harmony with nature, right, but not just nature, each other. Right. And so they really impressed me. And again, it was a short meeting, but that's kind of how we jumped off, and it's taken a year to obviously get to this point where we're going to launch the product. So.
But I love the whole story, right? So the family, and then the next generation is looking for different kind of answers and are pushing in a new way. I have a piece right here. So the La Pietra Compactata is compressed, right? Compressed stone.
Yep,
so
compactata. Yep.
I also like that it's made out of stone, right? Correct.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part about the material in the end. It is stone, right? So it's not some components to make it look a certain way or make it look like something else. I mean, it looks like stone. Obviously, I think some of the comments we heard, it kind of looked like maybe like a masonry or block form and that sort of thing. But I think with the textures available, it's a stone. Yeah. By all means, it's a stone.
Yeah. Okay. Well. First of all, I want Jennifer's and Shamir's reaction. But Shamir, you had like a million questions, which I love, because he's like, okay, I need to know this and this and this. So why don't you ask Ron some questions?
Cindy, I want to start by saying something that you touched on with Ron already, which is that one of the things that is so appealing about this product to me, and having been to a stone yard, to a stone fabrication factory in Italy, and watched how much waste there is with stone, one of the great things about this product is that they are using the waste byproduct, the stone, to make this material, and it's beautiful just in that there's up to 60% recycled stone in the material. It is not fired, it's formed so that there's no heat used to make the stuff, so it's low energy in production, and it's good for indoor and outdoor use, which is great. I think the material is really beautiful. It looks like precast or concrete, the stuff that I'm really drawn to. and the textural surfaces are really beautiful. So my questions, I guess, were with for this product. Ron, is this usable? I know it's usable for floors and walls, and is it intended to be mud set, or can it go on pedestals like traditional pavers?
Good question. And firstly, thank you for the talk on the material. That was very well done. Thank you. But yes, it could go in pedestals. Obviously, the largest unit that we use, you'd have to figure out your pedestal design, right? Because obviously smaller pavers equals more pedestals. And so you kind of, wind up with maybe a more expensive job that needs to. But their intention, or how it's been installed, is it's installed like natural stone. So it's either in a mud bed. The interior product obviously can be thin set, but more likely a medium bed because of the thickness, right? The product is 15 millimeter or 22 millimeter for the outside. And then for just outdoor paving, typical like stone dust, right? That it would just be compacted into the earth, or you can put it on your lawn and have the grass grow between. So really no different than any stone that you might do in the same type of scenario.
Ron, there was also, Shamir also had another, I thought this was a really good question on the finish, because Shamir, I know that you like smooth finishes. So, and this is definitely textural. So tell us about the two finishes.
They have what they call a tumbled finish, or consolare, where they actually take the physical pieces and put it in a tumbler. That is the biggest product for them for exterior. So it kind of has an already worn appearance to it. The interior finish, what they just call natural, is smooth to the touch compared to the tumbled. And then they do make a product that's called lapata, which is, it's not like a true polish like a stone would be, but it is available. But it's funny, it does flatten the surface a little bit more, but it's the one that they barely sell. So I guess we'll in the end we'll find out what really works. So those are the three finishes. We're, I guess, betting on the tumbled and the natural finish for the get-go, and the sample boxes reflect that at this time.
Jennifer, when you look at new products, you're always thinking about like how, I imagine, how a multitude of people might be experiencing or walking on something, or durability. So when you were looking at this, when you got the package, like what were you thinking about?
Well, I knew instantly it was going to be a huge hit with our team. And I brought it out to the library yesterday. We had, I'd say, almost everybody in the office. Probably gonna have to have at least 2 boxes because it just disappeared instantly. And into everybody's pallet board. So it's just filling a need. And, speaking to that wellness thing, we have been asked to do so many outdoor environments that feel like indoor environments, that carry that layering and color. There's really not that much product out there that is suitable for, how many times can you use encaustic tile? So it's not always the right look. And we're very excited about the color range here, because while you've got a lot of great neutrals, you also have really rich color palettes. And I think that the that seamless kind of transition between indoor and outdoor, by being able to use the indoor and the outdoor product in the same colorway, is going to be really exciting to explore. On the West Coast, we totally have the ability to do that almost all year round. And so exploring that now has become even more important to hotels as they kind of try to turn outward. Even ballrooms and, restaurants and everything want to be really accessible and connected to the outdoors. So we're excited about that. And I love the kind of aged patina with the texture, the fact that it has that almost lived in look, which is good for hospitality because it gets that very quickly, even if you don't intend it. And so to start with it and start with that kind of earthy layering is great. The sustainability story, we have many projects that mandate using sustainable materials. And as you say, it's been a pretty much bare bones selection of really exciting materiality on that front. So we're excited to have something so vibrant you know.
Shamir, I want to know I know your color palette, but tell us a couple that you like. I know that the range is 24, but you lean more to earth, right?
More to earth. And it's really interesting to hear the other side of this. You know, Jennifer's really interested in using this sort of wide color palette. And Cindy, I have my 5 sort of favorites here, and you can see this very broad range.
You can send me the other ones,
like,
Shamir.
we may, since you're looking for doubles, we'll just send you the rest of the box.
Exactly.
But this stuff is so beautiful. And like Jennifer said, the idea that you can actually put this stuff indoors and carry the same material outdoors, that's unusual. And it's really, it's something that we're going to, is very appealing. But all the different textural surfaces within the same color that you can, sort of play with is going to make this. I think this product is going to do really well. The one question I had for Ron also is this material going to be available in slab, or is it?
I was going to ask the same thing.
Tile material? And also, what about the edges? Can we finish? Can the edges be finished? How's that going to work?
I love all the questions. More.
They need,
As far as slabs go, at this point, they cannot do it because of because it's compacted, right? So the biggest size at this point, I think, is 13 by 27 inches. They have tested, and I kind of pushed them as well. That was one of my first questions. How big a slab? So even if we can get to a vanity size slab, that would be a good thing. I think that potentially comes. I don't know that they may have to use different product as the binder, which they don't want to, kind of go to. They want this 60% recycled content. And then as far as the edges go, yes, they have pool copings. You can do stair treads where you can do the nosing. In the end, it's a stone, right?
Mm.
So it's really not a problem to do that, Shamir.
Great.
well, maybe they'll figure out, what's so great also is that this is just happening, right? It's like right now. I'm sure they'll find some more eco-friendly solutions for bigger sizes in the future, or we'll try to. It's so interesting to hear what you're saying, as in they don't want to add the binder, they want to keep it as intended, which is fantastic. I think behind you, Ron, are the colors, right, for everyone,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes, we brought those in. Those are always in my office these days, but yeah. We have the color palettes on the left. We have hexagons. They have the brick shapes, which you can do obviously herringbone patterns and things like that. They did make some small mosaics, which we're showing in some of the showrooms, like little circles or penny rounds, I guess would be the terminology. So again, I think with the infusion of the young family here of moving in that direction, they just again see it to be used everywhere. So you want to put it in your shower, put it in the shower. If it wants to be an exterior pool, do that. So very, very exciting. And again, I think we found a product that checks the boxes, sustainability, wellness, but also good design that we can give to people like Jennifer and Shamir to go ahead and make something special, which is what we're about.
Yes. Well, first of all, Ron, I want to thank you. It was an amazing, I remember when you were telling me this story, we were on Zoom and I thought, wow, this is an amazing story and so relevant about what's happening in the future, all the needs from our community that are talking about how can we be more sustainable, more kind to the earth, how can we be good to each other in terms of wellness, and having such amazing feedback from these heavy hitters who are here today, such good friends of interior design, of the industry, and of Stone Source. So Jennifer Johansen from EDG, love you so much, thank you. And I can't wait to see some of these new projects you're photographing. And Shamir Shah of Shamir Shah, my very, very dear friend. I know you're going to use the gold too, right? That gold in that harvest golden color. That'll be really nice.
Yeah, it's a great range, and I'm actually looking forward to trying this. After I finish this interview with you, I'm going to walk out to the bathroom and wet this stuff and see what happens to it. But I think it's going to do great. Designers always thinking about how to use the product, which is what we love. So
big shout out to all of you. Thank you so much. Can't wait
Thank
to
you,
see
everybody.
you in person very soon.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
Cheryl.
Bye.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Metropolis Think Tank Thursdays. I'm Tina Brennan, Vice President of Marketing for Metropolis. Today, we are pleased to be hosted by Gensler in the Minneapolis office, who will be exploring the possibilities for neighborhood-centric development and inclusive design in our city, and what steps we can collectively take to ensure a vibrant and equitable future. Hosting an event like this requires the support of great firms like Gensler and our incredible sponsors. We'd like to thank CertainTeed, show-stopping ceilings and walls that achieve the extraordinary for every space and every budget. DuPont Tedler, PVF film for every surface worth protecting. Growy, designing and engineering innovative water products for bathroom solutions and kitchen fittings. Kimball, designing the spaces where you can work your way. Mannington Commercial, crafting flooring with purpose for more than 100 years. And Versteel, a solutions provider of American-made furnishings for working and learning environments. And now I would like to introduce you to today's moderator, Metropolis's editor-in-chief, Avi Rajagopal. Avi?
Thanks so much, Tina. And thank you all so much for joining us today for today's think tank. Before we begin, a quick note, I would like to make tribute to Art Gensler, the visionary founder of Gensler, who passed away this week. Art was a colossus in our industry and created one of the most vibrant, diverse practices anywhere in the world. People like him change the world and leave it for the better. We are all indebted to Art Gensler today, and we are so thrilled to be hosted by Gensler's Minneapolis office for today's discussion. We're going to be talking about equitable development today. And while we're talking about Minneapolis and North Minneapolis in particular, it's not lost on anyone, I know, that almost every city in the United States deals with a similar issue with particular neighborhoods. Here in New York, we have many. I'm sure there are many neighborhoods in the cities where you live, places where people have never had the same opportunities as some of their fellow citizens have had due to a variety of structural and discriminatory practices. Those neighborhoods becoming attractive locations for developers certainly creates a tension in many places. And so the question is, as we bring opportunity to neighborhoods, as we work with neighborhoods to help them, set their own path and their own future, how can we do so in an inclusive and equitable way? To help us discuss that, a pretty complex topic today, I'm thrilled to have Adair Mosley, who's the president and CEO of Pillsbury United Communities. They're such a pleasure to have you with us today. Also with us is Bill Baxley, who is the principal and managing director at Gensler's Minneapolis office. Bill, thank you so much for hosting today's discussion and bringing this amazing group of panelists together. We also have Sean Pierce, who is the Economic Development and Inclusion Policy Director for the City of Minneapolis. Sean, such a pleasure to have you, and I can't wait to hear about the work that you do. And Todd Smith, who's a partner at Master Properties. Todd, such a pleasure to have you with us today. I'd love to start with Adair. North Minneapolis certainly hasn't always seen the opportunities that have been available to other neighborhoods, as we said, for a host of reasons. But through projects like North Market, you've actually created some models for a way forward. What barriers do we need to overcome? What do we need to deal with to see more inclusive, community-driven projects? So tell us a little bit about North Market, and tell us about the process that you use in developing your projects.
Yes, thank you, Avi. Good afternoon, everyone. I have the privilege and honor of stewarding a 140-year-old community impact organization, Pillsbury United Communities in Minneapolis. And it has simply anchored its work in one virtue, and I believe that has been humility. And that is the cornerstone by which I think we need to engage communities. It is humility. That communities have the solutions to their problems. They have aspirations and dreams and desires for themselves and their families. And it is simply up to us as in positions of power and leading institutions to be able to unlock that. And I think that that's ultimately at the ethos of equitable economic development. We are a multi-service organization and have over the last few years really thought more concretely about how do we build and develop community. The project that you mentioned was a grocery store that we brought to the North Minneapolis community, North Market. And it started simply by engaging community. And oftentimes when you go in and you think that you know the solution, community will course correct and they will tell you what they need. And we were going in to answer a different question, but what community really unearthed for us was the dignity that needed to be restored, that they were traveling over 3 miles in both directions to be able to access a grocery store. And so we used the influence of our organization and brought the philanthropic public sector partners together to be able to bring this to fruition in community. The other thing that I'd like to point out, and we use tools, very tactically, tools of human-centered design. I know that's a tool that most people that centers the end user's aspirations into helping in the problem solving. We also use tools such as Appreciative Inquiry, and that is based on that communities are not broken. Right? They are fragile, and they're fragile because they come in contact with systems that have continuously oppressed them. And you can't build unbroken. And so how do you think about the assets that are in a community and use and wield those in ways to be able to create the level of transformative change? The last thing I'll add to this specific thing is that it's very important as we talk about urban revitalization, equitable economic development, to also understand the harm that we have caused. And we have to repair that first. And if we don't acknowledge that in the communities by which we're trying to bring assets, then we're not authentic in our truest expressions of truly bringing equitable economic development. It has been a legacy of choices that we've made, from racial covenants to exclusionary lending, to really now that many communities are faced with gentrification and displacement. And these have been policies and practices that have been baked into our institutions that have excluded particularly Black and Brown people. So we have to be able to repair that harm first before we can think about doing this work.
Thank you so much, Adair. There's so much in what you said. You started out talking about humility. I love the idea of appreciative inquiry. And I think both of those things stem from that last point that you made, the recognition that we have been part of the problem. That when we go into a neighborhood and we see a lack of opportunity, we see, poor developmental indicators or social indicators, those are not the responsibility just of the people who live in that community. That's a shared responsibility that we all bear. And so to appreciate the ways that that community has been able to deal with those challenges, the way that they have been able to diagnose their own problems and tell us, what it is that they need. I think that's really important. So thank you so much, Adair, for sort of setting that tone for us. Sean, I'd love to bring you in here. I mean, 2020, I'm sure, has not been, to put it mildly, an easy year for someone in your job. And this year in Minneapolis in particular, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, as we know, affected communities of color, low-income communities disproportionately. We also, have seen, in Minneapolis itself around, the killing of George Floyd, as well as, the series of incidents, and of course, more recent ones as well, that we've seen happen around the country. Talking about equitable development at this point in time, I think it really brings to the fore all the sort of critical issues within that work. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what role the city plays, in that dialogue between, development and community. How is the city kind of engaging both stakeholders? How are you working towards a better future in those neighborhoods?
Thank you for the question, Avi, and thanks for having me. It's good to be here with you all. Let me start by saying that I completely agree with our brother Adair. So thank you for lifting up those components. There are a few pieces that we have to first acknowledge before we move forward, right? And you all will learn throughout our time together that I don't do this multiculturalism, block everybody in the BIPOC category, right? Like we all have very different and unique experiences. So, and oftentimes we talk about people of color or Black and brown people, and some of those people don't actually identify as people of color. So I like to start by going back to the foundation of where we're at, in the Twin Cities, probably more than some other places. And in Minneapolis, there are two groups that we know for sure are the foundation of this country and certainly our city, and that is our Native brothers and sisters and Two-Spirit folks, Indigenous or American Indian, depending on who you ask, and Black folks. And I think particularly Black people who are sometimes now called American descendants of slavery, not slaves. And some of those folks were actually descendants of free Black people who were later enslaved in this country. So, I lift that up because without the land that was taken, without the labor, without the ingenuity, without the contributions in the inception and of this nation, none of us would be able to be here, and we certainly would not be able to have this conversation. And so our work, and my work, it's a long title, is really about getting away from this trajectory of our cities, and including the city of Minneapolis, of trying to play this game where a rising tide lifts all boats. It's just not true, right? So equitable development for us is actually implementing specific solutions to the very specific harms, right? So we've had a number of pieces move forward over the last, we're at 3.5 years with Mayor Fry now as mayor, but last couple of years in particular. And what I would say is, as COVID hit us in March, I was frustrated and everyone was confused. And then I found a moment of gratitude, because I think a number of us know, certainly in this field and in our markets, that we were already projecting an economic downturn, right? So the most savvy business leaders, industry leaders, particularly in developments, we'd already been planning for this. So about 2, 3, 4 years out. And what I think COVID-19 brought to us around the globe, but particularly in the US, because we take care or don't take care of our people differently in this country, was that it didn't matter really your class. At the very, very beginning, we were all being hit and no one knew what to prepare for. Now, as time went on, we saw that particularly Black people, and particularly people who didn't have a lot of money, and particularly working class hourly people, were disenfranchised the most, and continue to bear the brunt of this, our hospitality workers. So we talk about how it is you can have all of us in construction still building the hotels, but we can't get our hotel workers actual support that they need to take care of themselves and their families. So where we've rested it as a city has evolved pretty rapidly over the last year or so, starting in March. I think it was March 16th, you know, everyone was talking about, well, when are we going to get back to normal? And I worked with the mayor and proposed this framework of Minneapolis Forward in early April, actually. And the idea was that while the rest of our city and our community, certainly in markets around economic development, we're really trying to get back to normal. Instead, as a city, we decided that we were going to use that moment as a sort of springboard to move through and emerge from the pandemic as a more inclusive, equitable, innovative, and robust city. And then you fast forward a few months, and when George Floyd was murdered, which we can now say, now that Derek Chauvin has been convicted, it was not just killed, he was murdered. I turned to the mayor and I said, you know what, we have to do this differently, right? Like, I think it's no surprise, and certainly for our Minneapolis folks, we know this well, the city is notoriously terrible at community engagement, right? Like, we just are not good at it. And I think there are all sorts of reasons why, including the fact that it's just bureaucracy and government. But I turned to him and I said, you know, we can't continue to do this thing the way we've done it. We have to put community at the forefront, which means we're going to move a little slower. It's going to look a bit different. And he said, all right, Sean, let's do it. And so we reached out to some folks while things were still smoldering in our city. And we formed what is called the Minneapolis Forward Community Now Coalition. And that really is at its center, this core strategy team of about 17 leaders, business owners, who some of whom I was right next to when their buildings were on fire, some nonprofit leaders who are in the most impacted corridors, but people who I think at their core are on the ground and they have been accountable to community somewhere between 15 and 20 years. So they're going to be here after every politician is gone, you know? And so we really tried to flip it on its head, which means we move a little slower than might seem possible in government. And then it's being very specific about the investments. So a couple of years ago, I stewarded a process that led to the creation of what we call cultural districts. And these are communities that are in our lowest income census tracts, but also those census tracts where it's 50% or more people of color. So in our region, we call it areas of concentrated poverty, where it's 50% more people of color, it's ACP 50s. And that has helped us to really heighten our investments, our focus, and our collaboration with people within those districts. We have a number of them. Then we moved over to really finding a strategy for ownership, particularly for Black, Indigenous, POC owned businesses. And, you know, after George Floyd was murdered and there was the uprising, the reality here is that we all know about the real estate damage, but what we sometimes forget as a community is that the real estate owners are not always the business owners. So the Commercial Property Development Fund actually is about moving to Adair's point about gentrification. It's an anti-gentrification strategy that is really about not a nonprofit or the city owning land, but these business owners who typically haven't had opportunities actually literally being the owners of the real estate in which they reside, and then having the technical support to do the work. And then we fast forwarded to a number of other pieces that we're working on. I led the creation and implementation of our city's first Black, city and state's first Black Business Week, which was a huge success. We have a largest redevelopment project is 48 acres along the Mississippi River called Upper Harbor Terminal. And in that project, we are looking at how we can ensure that Northsiders, in particular, historic Northsiders, which for us, we know are Black people largely, actually are the primary and first beneficiaries of any investment that comes out of there. We've even done some unique things like proposing attainable senior housing right on the river. That's not typically what happens, right? And that's because we have an incredible development partner, and through Commercial Property Development Fund have started to make really direct capital infusions into projects like Baldwin Square, which is led by Jamil Ford of Mobilize Design in North Minneapolis. 927 West Broadway, where we have another BIPOC construction firm, Tri Construction, as a lead partner there. So really, you know, there's the talk, there are the declarations, but our work, our pivoting, really rapid pivot as a city is about putting the financial and technical resources into the work of equitable development instead of all of the sweet talk and declarations, if you will. And I can say much more about that, but that's the synopsis.
Sean, thank you so much for that that wonderful overview. I think what I take away is, this idea of, figuring out who are the people who are leaders in communities as it is, who are responsible to their communities, whether they be nonprofit leaders or business owners or others, and then seeing how one might empower them. I also hear you talking about using commercial development as a tool in this process, really sort of leading with the community engagement, but then, using community development as almost as a strategy for neighborhood development. And that's really exciting as well. And of course, ownership as a counter to gentrification. If people in the audience don't bring that up, I'm sure I'll bring it up later for us to discuss a little bit more, because I know Adair's work, some of that is also in that area. So that would be great to talk about. But I'd like to bring Todd in here as a developer, who is working in that, a primarily Black neighborhood and a low-income neighborhood. Todd, you've begun this process of community engagement, with partner firms. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to that approach, and why it should matter for other developers in the city, having heard what Adair and Sean have had to say.
Well, everyone's mentioned the twin things that have happened in the Twin Cities. There was certainly a pandemic-related pause in real estate development, and the social unrest following George Floyd's murder truly was transformational in our community, and hit so many people so hard. With our small company, we paused and said, "Hey, how can we do this differently? And how can we be more inclusive?" And not knowing all the answers, really reached out and networked with people in the community that have a lot more experience than I. Anthony Taylor has been involved in a lot of things with the Cultural Wellness Committee, a woman named Damaris Hollingsworth, who's done a ton of outreach. Were pretty instrumental with us sort of recognizing, what are our shared principles, and what so much in development is about the capital markets and money. And it's like, hey, what we all realize is the human capital is what we need to acknowledge in our response to this call for, social or economic justice. And so there's a lot of resources in North Minneapolis, and a lot of people that are doing amazing things. And it became like trying to partner with them and sort of like getting a piece of what all they're doing. And I'm not going to be exhaustive, but NAS, the North Side Economic Achievement Zone, Emerge, Summit Academy. There are all these different entities that are finding people within the community that are passionate for change and want to better themselves. And so, okay, with all these skills that we can define what people need, could we on the other side take our tenants, our companies, corporate America, and say, hey, we recognize it really seems like corporate America is leaning in and is engaged on these issues of social justice, right? So if we, as a developer in the middle of this, can just sort of try to track them, here's what our tenants are wanting. And I know that these people, all these organizations are doing this, but to make it, Target might have the best intentions in the world, but it's not their job to do it. And can we somehow make those pathways cleaner and easier is sort of what our goal has been to do.
Yeah, I love hearing that, seeing your role as developers almost as connectors and facilitators, right? Bringing together resources that might lie on both sides, and using development as a way to bring them together. That's really interesting, and I think it links in with with what Sean and Adair was saying earlier as well. Bill, I'd love to bring you in here. So, how do designers, architects, and planners, how do we fit into this scenario? And maybe even a little bit about what your viewpoint is at Gensler on this.
Thanks, Avi. Yeah, I think it was said earlier. I think we, before we jump into anything, I think we do have to kind of own the responsibility for the situation that we're in. You know, I think this inequity didn't just happen. And I think the role of architects and designers, we were participants in this. And I think you have to sort of recognize that fact and understand that we have to take really seriously our responsibility to help get ourselves out of it. And so, I think the issue of inclusivity is really interesting relative and important relative to design. And I think we like to think about it along the lines of experience. And for us, I think that inclusive design is creating a diversity of ways for people to participate in that shared experience and really belonging to that experience. As designers and as business leaders, we have to understand that every choice we make in that experience is either increasing or decreasing the connections that people have to their neighborhoods, to their communities, and to their worlds around them. And if we're not asking those questions and using our creativity, our blind spots appear all over the place, and we've been taught to be problem solvers, and I think right now is not the time to come to the table initially with solutions. That there's a lot of listening that has to happen, a lot of questions, and I think many times those greatest ideas come from those quietest voices, that if we just sit back, listen, let the ideas sort of come, as opposed to us coming with those solutions. I think designers and architects have to really take a step back and use our power as connectors and observers and listeners, as opposed to, like we always describe ourselves, well, we're problem solvers. We'll come up with a solution, we'll fix it. So, and I think our, working with Todd and the Nova project there in North Minneapolis is a chance for us. I mean, we started off in the traditional way, and then we said, wait a minute, what are we doing here? We are walking down a road that we've done before, and really need to rethink it. And I appreciate their ability to step back and to say, we've made some mistakes. How can we look at this in a different way?
I think, Bill, you've brought us around to this idea of, listening, and I'd love to hear all of you kind of reflect on that a bit. Adair, you brought up this idea of appreciative inquiry, or coming into a situation with humility. That seemed to be a way, to suggest how we might listen. Sean, you spoke about, really looking at, who's responsible for those communities, who has been already taking that leadership role. And then Todd, you spoke about, the various organizations and the various initiatives that are already engaged in communities and interacting with them. So I'd love to just, talk for a few minutes. We speak about engagement very often, especially in the architecture and design world. And engagement can come in many shapes and forms. And I know that, at this point, maybe we have a few more questions than we have answers, but I'd still love to hear, what are some useful and equitable modes of engagement? How do we, knowing that we want to build, or asking if we should build, how do we go into a community? How do we set the terms of engagement? What are some useful attitudes? What are some helpful strategies there? I'd love to hear from the panelists on that.
I think it's important to note that the mindset are that the principles of engagement are not a singular moment. That engagement is it's a continued evolution. It's a continued practice, and organizations and communities that are really passionate and committed to engagement will not see it as something that you check off. right? And even once the development is done, it's an obligation that those that occupy that space continue to engage the community in which it's centered and around, and listening to the voices. A lot of the work that we do, right, is I've made myself accessible to the entire community. I've directly responded to social media requests as the leader of the organization so that people know that I am present and actively involved. And so if you think that it's only something and once the building goes up, so I think shifting that mindset to say that it's a continued practice and it's really a value, right? What do we value? And do we value listening to the voices of the communities in which we're going to do the work? I would also like to point out that we, in some of these questions here, but all of these strategies have to be baked in on the front end before you start the development. And so if you seek to not displace or gentrify, you have to bake that in on the front end. So what are the set of policies and practices that need to accompany the development? We launched a community development corporation, Justice Built Communities, and are going to, alongside that, champion an anti-gentrification, anti-displacement policies, and understanding the intersection of policies and what happens when you start to put in areas that have seen a level of historic disinvestment. When you start to make these investments, then there's a ripple effect that happens. And we need a balance of policies, and we need to work with our public sector partners such as Sean to help enact those types of things that don't displace and gentrify our communities. And the last thing I'll say is equitable development, the movement, right, is through the lens of racial and economic kind of equity lens. And engagement of communities of color and low-income communities is prioritizing, designing, and then implementing their aspirations in their neighborhoods and cities. And so if you're not thinking about that entire continuum, if you're not thinking about the economic, not only just what do we bring here, right, but the economic and socioeconomic conditions of a community, then I think that's a very myopic kind of view of development, and it's intersectional. And we need to broaden that lens as we think about how do we shape and rebuild communities more equitably.
I mean, I can add to this. I think that there are a few pieces that are critical if we want to be honest, right? Like at the end of the day, most people who are in development, in economic development, community development, architecture, design, anticipate that there's a profit at the other end, right? Like it's not usually, I just want to create a nice building that looks great, right? That no one ever goes into, that I don't get paid for, that I have to sleep in because I didn't get a check. And to do that well, and to not just listen, but I think really embed what community has said in the forefront of a project. There has to be a shared language. And if we're honest, like government doesn't speak the same language as business typically. Business doesn't typically speak the same language as your average neighbor. And there are a number of us that saw that. I mean, we this is like not a new thing, right? But we knew about that. And so a number of years ago, I was actually the executive director at the Harrison Neighborhood Association. And when I was actually, before I was there, the neighbors, this is the southernmost neighborhood in North Minneapolis, right? Bryn Mawr actually used to be a part of North Minneapolis, but we could talk about systemic and institutional racism and why they lobbied not to be a part of that another time. That's a whole session itself. But Harrison Neighborhood Association and the Harrison neighbors saw the transit investments that were coming in. And if you know this part of North Minneapolis, you also know that there are former Superfund sites in that area. And so knowing that there's gonna be this major investment coming, the community really got together and said, we cannot get pushed out. This cannot be the same way development has happened before. And eventually Harrison Neighborhood Association came together with about 14 or 15, I believe, other nonprofits, primarily in foundations, to create what's called the Equitable Development Principles and Scorecard. And I'm lifting that up because, like I started with, we don't always have a shared language. The idea of the Equitable Development Principles and Scorecard is for it to actually facilitate a common understanding about what the goal is on the forefront. And the reason that I think that that is so important, if we really want to talk about what listening in it is, in every city, just about, unless you're doing a solely private transaction, it doesn't have to be vetted by your municipality. Point out the community and tell me where to start building, because I haven't run into that place yet. You know, you have to actually vet your project with your city, your county, what have you. I happen to be a firm believer that our greatest asset is always our people, right? So I always said to folks, to our developers in particular, if you really want to be successful, you don't go to the city by yourself. You go to the city with the people, right? And you let your neighbors advocate for that project in its entirety, rather than trying to get this thing and spending sometimes millions of dollars, right, Todd, right, Bill? Millions of dollars before you actually get to an approval stage. So the idea of listening is important, but I actually think, and I'm not a person that likes engagement. I will just say that to you all now. I think it is an overused buzzword. I don't want to be engaged. If you're gonna waste my time and ask me what I think as a neighbor, as a taxpayer, I expect you to find a way to embed what the intellectual property that I'm giving you into whatever you're asking me about. So I'm not, don't come and just like give me a seat at the table. I'm trying to build a house with you. So I think that the pivot that we actually need to make, and that really is equitable development, is moving away from listening and engaging to a place of joint struggle and joint design, right? Like, how differently does North Minneapolis evolve over time if we understand that the primary beneficiaries, the people who have actually made generations, 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 generations of investments into that community, are actually largely Black folks and moderate to low income white people, very few, but in that community. So if we understand that they are actually the ones who have poured in constantly, how does that change the way we actually think about what gets built, who gets invited to the table, who gets the investment? You know, is there a way for the city, for our nonprofits, for our developers, our designers, to actually bolster the work in a way that the actual community, the residents, and those business owners are the end owners? They're not just tenants. They're not just contractors. They're not just getting a little bit of sub work. They're literally the owners of what gets created. I'll say that in North Minneapolis, the only, I'm being dramatic when I say only, but the primary folks that I think are not from North Minneapolis, who I've heard talk about at the end of the development probably not owning anything, it's been United Properties on our Upper Harbor Terminal project, right? Like, they continue to say, you know what, we might not be the owners. We might just be the builders and the supporters and help make this happen, but the owners could look different. And I think that's the energy that really is necessary to move us from this listening and engagement phase to actually concretizing the level of investment that's required to really have vibrant cities. Because if we're honest, there aren't very many areas left to develop in Minneapolis in particular. North Minneapolis is one of them. And so we have to do that in a way that is just. And I think we'll get to Jessica's question too, which deals with, you know, like how you do that and deal with taxes and access to clean water and groceries and those sorts of things. I guess the last thing that I would say is I would really encourage everyone to support any initiatives that are coming from the people that are there. So I think about Devon Nolan and the public market concept that she's led for who knows how many years now, and the farmers market that she leads. I think about KB and Katie over at Wolfpack Promotions. If you need printing, getting that done there. I think about the work that so many people are doing around the creation of a Black CDC, since a majority of our North Minneapolis residents are in fact Black. Supporting the folks that are there matters. And not just putting the money and resources in people who are allied with community, but actually our community.
Hey, Sean, I do think listening is important. And I think there are no skip steps. So, and I know that's not what you're saying, but I think, you know, it's interesting. Minneapolis does sort of champion their sort of neighborhood process. I've been through it many times, but I think from what's interesting from a designer standpoint is designers have this real penchant for control. You know, I think both they want to control the outcome and they want to control the process. They may sort of make it feel as though it's expansive, but at the end of the day, it's still about that control. And I think one of the challenges for us is to truly step into that space and let the evolution be okay with the development happening outside of our control, and then being able to sort of still deliver something at the end of the day. I think that, you know, if you ask what's a scary question for a developer, is that a community process may lead to something I can't even deliver on. And so being open on ownership, on finances, on the actual delivery of that that's a very wonderful, but very different in many ways that we're used to. And so I think it represents for a lot of people, probably some scary space. Like, oh, how do we do that, right? Because we're going to mess up pretty badly, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And, how do we learn from that, you know?
Yeah.
I completely agree, Bill, and you're spot on. I was just saying that we should not stop at listening, because that's what often happens. We listen and then it doesn't go anywhere.
Check. Right. Yeah.
But I think, you know, like Bill, let's just think about your clients, right? You're executing control on their behalf.
Right.
And so it's not about, in my perspective, and I've seen this better in, you know, some other markets, but, you know, I think it's not about letting go of control. I think it's about reframing the clients.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Sean, I just wanted to step up and say the shared language and having a way to communicate with each other has been so important, and it's still such a learning process for my team. And only if we can clearly share, like, here's our aspirations and our goals. And sometimes you just don't have the words, and it needs to be developed collectively. And we've spent a lot of time doing that, and it's fun, and it's still a progression. But I just wanted to say, the language matters. And then as a second thought, when you were talking about, hey, let's get the community involved, I don't know investment, like real estate investment, and historically the amount of money you need to be involved in playing that game. It's been something, you know, qualified blue sky, terminology like that. Why can't we have micro investment in real estate, just like we have micro lending? And a guy, Jim Terrell, who several of the panelists I know, did a study with the U and the Carlson School about exactly that. And wouldn't it be great if we could have investment vehicles at smaller amounts, that we could have greater collaborative input from all of the community? And I think that's a really interesting and exciting thing. And that's it.
Yeah, and potentially give, you know, people from the community the ability to invest in things that are happening in their neighborhood. You know, making investment in addition to ownership accessible. Just a quick note here to say thank you to Gensler for the conversation today. We're going to start taking audience questions really quickly. For everyone who's listening, you're going to see another poll come up on your screen. It would be great if you could take a couple of seconds to respond to that. In the meantime, a quick thank you also to our sponsors, Certainty, DuPont Tedlar, Growy, Kimball, Mannington Commercial, and Versteel for making today's discussion possible. Let's get to a couple of the audience questions here. Jennifer Johansen says, as you discuss gentrification and ownership as a way to combat the consequences of gentrification, has Minneapolis enacted any policies related to property tax code that lessens the burden for those living in gentrifying neighborhoods? It's a very interesting question, of course. You know, gentrification is not just, you know, some abstract, you know, thing that happens. It puts economic burden on already burdened communities. So I'd just love to talk about that a little bit. You know, let's talk first about gentrification and ownership, and maybe Adair, you want to talk a little bit about how you've encouraged ownership models in your own work, and then let's talk about, you know, city policies that alleviate the property tax burden as neighborhoods change.
This is jumping a little bit ahead of there, but I do agree with the panelists when we talk about shared language. And one of those words is gentrification, and what do we mean by it? And I've largely believed that gentrification is, first of all, we want socioeconomic kind of diverse communities. We don't want to concentrate poverty. The concentrating poverty leads to, lower quality of life, you know, largely in communities, and other undesirable activities. And so how do we have diverse socioeconomic communities, which means that's, to my point, is widening the lens, right? When we think about the development, we need to think about the workforce development strategies. We need to think about growing the capacity of community at the same time when we're bringing these types of catalytic kind of developments into community. The other thing with gentrification to me is it's the erasure of people in place that have made this place. And so oftentimes you get affluent, right? Individuals that come into community, largely white affluent individuals that come in and now through a white supremacist lens, put their beliefs, their values on a community that has existed and labored there and starts to erase the culture. We saw this in debates in DC and other areas. And so I think those are some of the things that we have to ultimately combat. And so how do we grow the capacity? How do we grow the economy of a community? How do we enact, to Jessica's point, policies that don't displace individuals? And so as I mentioned, we are really championing, right? How do we use the developer scorecard that Sean's talking about? How do we have the right of return for potential renters that are coming back? How do we think about property tax freezes across? How do we have a renter's bill of rights? All of these progressive policy suites that we really need to be braiding together that is going to fortify our communities. But we want the investments. We want the investments to be driven by the individuals. If you go into any urban core, there are individuals that have dreams and aspirations, but simply don't have access and opportunity. And so how do we bridge those two things?
Yeah, the only thing I would add from a policy standpoint to what you were just saying, Adair, is I think there are multiple institutions that are at play here, right? So one kind of crazy proposal that I had early on that now is moving forward is kind of acknowledgement that you never want to suppress values, right? So the reality is we want people's home values to go up, their property values to go up as these investments happen. It is a part of the sort of capitalist traditional wealth creation model. But the taxes are critical if you're already at your max on your property, whether it's your mortgage or your rent, which could, your landlord might raise your rent if their property taxes go up. So one idea is, which would be I think led by Hennepin County, is actually to have a graduated payment plan for the increase in taxes. So as your value increases, instead of suppressing the value or doing an outright freeze, you'd be able to go through a county program similar to like your senior exemptions and senior freezes. And let's say you have a 200% increase. I'm being dramatic, but let's say you do. Maybe in year one, you only pay 10%. And in year two, maybe you pay 20%. And, and so on and so forth. And if you can't pay it, there's some sort of, long-term residency exemption or something that you get so that you can benefit from the additional equity without carrying the burden of the additional expense. We don't have that yet in our region and in our market, but I think as we are seeing, houses on the market right now are somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 for siding and stucco, right? Like that's something to consider. Commercial rents, a lot of people don't know this. In North Minneapolis, you can command higher rents than you do in some parts of downtown. And this has been a case for years and people don't talk about it. Like there is a reason. Now it's, you have to decide how you're going to do it. But we do need some policies in place. We are actually a part of an anti-displacement network, national network, and we are working on right to return policies, particularly around housing, because we know that, like LA and some other cities have done this, but there's development that has taken place that just price people out. Right. And so we want folks to be able to come home. We have a number of City of Minneapolis employees even who are now living in a first, second, or third ring suburb just because it's less expensive to be up there. But what we don't always take into consideration as we as a community of folks in economic development are pricing people out is that those increased transportation costs actually don't make it any cheaper to live out there sometimes. So the first right of refusal has always been huge, I think, particularly around the TOD, transit-oriented development, advocating for and really pushing for first right of refusal, particularly for some of the renters oddly enough, who are in subsidized or very naturally occurring affordable housing, to have them have options when new housing takes place of what they were in before is really, really, really critical. Now that impacts the owner's tax structure. But again, I think about this, Jessica, because those get passed on to the families and they do become a part of the cost burden analysis. So I would say, in short, although we've been looking at a number of things, we as a region, and it does take a region here because the county and the state would have to be involved, I don't think that we've come up with the level of tax relief and taxation strategy that really is justice oriented. We've done what we can as a city. We actually reassessed properties that were impacted by the uprisings, for example. And so we actually did see a decrease in those tax payments that were due, and actually for some people, even a refund on their taxes, which of course was helpful as people were looking at less work. But it's not the same as having a shared strategy across jurisdictions.
The one thing I was going to add to that, we are, I believe in the values and the principles of co-op, and there's several initiatives across our region that are co-op principles, and thinking about co-op as a shared ownership kind of model. One of the things that we're doing in this, Justice, and there's several efforts that are doing this, but trying to think about land acquisition. And we're in a unique position as a community-based organization in that we can weave both private dollars and philanthropic dollars together to be able to get speculative kind of land or move it from the speculative market, right? So that way we can bridge it to ownership to Black and Brown residents. And we've also acknowledged, and what we've been telling our investors is that, right, we may not recoup totally what we put in, right? And we know that right, housing market prices are astronomical right now, and also commercial, right? And so it's inflated in some areas, but we're going in and leveraging the resources that we've been able to fundraise to take these properties off, because we know we do run the risk of potentially outside developers coming in who see this as, if in a community like North Minneapolis, right, that has seen such underinvestment, disinvestment, as an opportunity to be able to seize. We also see, and Sean knows this well, property owners who haven't, they have the liquidity, right? They can pay the property taxes, but have not made the types of investments in their properties, who don't live in community, who don't have the interest of community. And so we're having very aggressive conversations with them to say, let's unlock this, let's, right? And in some of that, it's paying a premium. But simply to get those owners out of the way so that we can truly start to turn this into a more community-driven approach.
Mm-hmm. And Adair, I think that's so critical. A lot of people aren't talking about just the need to do pretty large-scale acquisition in a way that is community-oriented. And folks have really pushed on the city to say, you should be buying this, this, and that. And I was like, no, as soon as anybody knows the city of Minneapolis is ready to write a check, that price goes up at least 4 or 5 times. So it's not an ideal role, I think, for our city in particular to do, but there are other strategies that we have around, cutting the cost of the acquisition that are really, really helpful. We actually partner with the City of Lake's Community Land Trust on a couple of initiatives, and I know the land trust model is just a part of the menu. The other thing I'd put out there for us to think about in this sector, and maybe we're thinking about it differently on taxes, is I'm actually very nervous about what 2023 to 2025 actually looks like for our sector, particularly when we know that 2020 and 2021 have resulted in such a decrease in sales tax, property tax, and those like other critical revenue drivers. And what does that mean for us, right? Like, what does it mean that our hoteliers have been sitting with vacancies, that our venues have been empty, that our stores have been closed, whether or not they've been boarded across the country? I think that's something for us to really, really consider. And again, not taxation, but it gets there as we talk about people who have the liquidity and don't make the investments, and those who don't have the liquidity want to make the investments and don't have the money. I think we're going to get to a place where we have to start looking at new criteria around credit worthiness, because certainly credit score is not going to be it. right? We're going to have many people who are ready to invest in their community, who want to take on ownership, who want to hire someone to do design or what have you. And they're not going to have the balance sheet, but they will have the vision, the heart, the community, and maybe the cash without the other collateral.
Yeah.
Hey, Sean, I wonder we talked about gentrification before. Typically the first thing that comes into mind is residential zones or components of cities, which has been kind of our baked in zoning approach for a long time, which is, I've got, here's my residential part of the city, here's the CBD, which has typically no housing. And, absent for that, when we talk about mixed use, it's even oversimplified. Well, it's just retail in the ground floor and housing above. I wonder how, especially in an area that has traditionally had sort of great jobs, whether it's light industrial or that, can we think more creatively from a zoning and comp plan standpoint about what mixed use really means? Why can't we have more industrial type jobs in the city? Why can't we have, why is it always just retail or always, and because I think that when we talk about the sort of 15-minute neighborhood, the ability to get from my job and live, it isn't just, housing is super important. We know we have a shortage here, but what makes a rich community is the ability to have access to those jobs, the economy, where we need it.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree, Bill. I would say it is an unfortunate reality that when it comes to something like a comprehensive plan, that we will mostly hear from people who are more concerned about bird safe glass than the implementation of mixed use. And now I'm a fan of bird safe glass, and I think that makes sense. Yep. But this is actually an area where we need partnership with the industry. I've always felt, I mean, right, because retail on the bottom, then that's skyrocketing the cost for everything, which is opposite of what we used to think in terms of it subsidizing, right?
Yeah.
But why can't we have horizontal mixed use? Right. What does it look like if on that block we have the grocery store, the gym, the daycare, the housing, or within a half-mile radius? I think it's possible, and frankly, I think it's more possible now. But this is again where it goes back to who is your client. I know that in North Minneapolis, people have been asking for just that for a long time.
Yeah.
But the language is off. So this language of industrial is actually the problem. What if we called it maker spaces? Right. What if we call it like production spaces, right? What if we had more live workspaces? I think Leah Hargett, who, I mean, is just brilliant. If you all don't know her, Leah and Damara sometimes work together. She's phenomenal. She's had this concept for live workspaces for years for our market. And could you imagine a scenario where we have that level of activity on any one of our corridors? And people always think of West Broadway, but like pick a block, Plymouth, Lowry, right? So I think we have to be creative, and I think that, well, I hope everyone goes out and votes for people who actually are more creative, right? But I think that this is a place where we really do need the industry to show up before you have a project that you're working on to say, hey, this is what it might look like if we had horizontal mixed use, or we actually built a complete street, or we did equitable transit-oriented developments. I think there is a lot of openness, but we don't see a lot of the creativity.
Well, and I think too, it's because we think about sometimes development as a project, as a building, as opposed to a district or a community where you are maybe getting multiple developers and community engagement to say, that's what our community needs. And I'm not just building a building here, right? And I think that is challenging, because we're into, it's dollars for a thing, as opposed to sort of thinking holistically about experience and community building.
Yeah, and I think the two projects that get to where you're talking in North Minneapolis right now that come to my mind are Satori with the Jack Group, JADDT, and Tim Baylor, and the Capri Block, actually, where it's more expansive vision, even if we're only seeing a portion of it right now.
Yeah, cool.
And Baldwin Square actually gets there.
When we talk about Nova and this process that we're making, or we talk about having a hub with integrated partners that are in the community, the whole idea of it, and we're hoping just with our company to have 4 phases to our development centered around 2nd and Broadway. would be that like, hey, everything we're doing in these networks we're creating, this is replicable. Like, you know, when you talk about like empowering the neighbors, it's like, great, why can't you live within a mile, have your job be there, and be raised up, and the whole community is raised? And Sean, everything that you said about like, hey, why can't we do this, and what's wrong with mixed use, I agree with wholeheartedly. Like, I am eating it up. If you go down to plan review, like it's just impossible to do stuff like that.
I know, you should call us at those times. That's what I can say. No, but that's why I say it's so important to get together before there's the project, because what we're really talking about is the vision around design, the vision around the movement, the space, and the breadth of a community. And that is just hard, because once you're at plan review, you know, that's not as tedious and, you know, as you can get. But yeah, if you ever have issues or questions, sometimes that's a good time to say to whoever your planner is that you're working with, hey, you know, I know this is outside of your typical approved scope. I've had a conversation with the mayor, I've had a conversation with a council member. Would you be open to us just inviting one more person in, and then call whoever that additional person is? They aren't always happy with that, but that's how change happens. You push us.
Yeah.
A lot. Hopefully not to the you know, bane of your pockets.
We have a couple of questions from the audience that I'd love to take up, but I just want to say, you know, as we're thinking about investment in communities, the big advantage of the kind of mixed use scenario that you're talking about is that investment is not just through capital investment, but also through payroll, right? Through jobs, through opportunities, and that builds a relationship. So then, you know, you can no longer just listen and leave. Then it becomes the kind of relationship that Adair is talking about. So, you know, I think you all have sort of unlocked this you know, one piece that I think addresses a lot of things we've been talking about so far. Katie Shards asked, when so much harm was done by creating racial segregation with using economic zoning in US history, how important is it now relative to equitable development to create and promote racially diverse neighborhoods? At what point does that become gentrification? If there's not work towards racial integration, how do you differentiate equitable development from separate but equal? But this speaks to a little bit to what you were saying. You know, we don't want to create poverty zones, and we don't want to create Black neighborhoods, right? I mean, that's not necessarily the intention here. So how do we think about racial diversity? Because, you know, often, you know, the influx of you know, white people, or you know, and in some cities in this country, South Asian people or East Asian people who have privilege into a neighborhood can be gentrification as well. So, you know, it's a thorny question, but I'd love to hear a couple of reactions to it.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't think you're going to design your way out of that one, Avi. That is getting comfortable having conversations with those neighbors. It's we can do that. It's not about a mandate. It's not about a policy. It's simply reaching out to your brother and sister who just moved in and making friends and kind of developing communities that have staying power, not being afraid of somebody that's different that arrives in your community. Minneapolis is fascinating because it is amazingly diverse, but it's everybody's got their own little zone, you know. We kind of this weird unconnectedness, and in a true sort of Midwestern fashion, it's everybody's kind of comfortable with that. It doesn't really challenge, but it's where those things overlap. The edges, I think, is finding that's where you'll get those successes, and it'll start to kind of permeate then into those other areas. But it's I don't know. I don't think that's a design question. That's like a humanity question. That's just like kind of know your neighbors, you know?
I also want to demystify this thing of like communities, Black and brown communities have to be in proximity to whiteness in order for them to be thriving. Right. I think we need to, that's absolutely not true. And so, you know, I personally resonate and see culture and beauty in seeing rich cultural communities, right? Where the full expression of people are on display and that they're able to have a very self-actualized and self-determined community. And that does not mean that, it's in proximity to whiteness. I think what we have to really think about when we think about with the push of desegregation, one of the great examples of that is the it opened these spatial kind of borders that existed, but what were the unintended consequences that came out of it? That it killed the pipeline for teachers of color and in communities. And so I think we have to think through the entire continuum and not just one simple, like one simple lever that if we say we want, more socioeconomic diverse communities, and how do we get there? How do we think through the entire, both the intended and unintended consequences of what happens to community, and prioritizing that question and really spending time with it, and then what are the ways that we can mitigate against that is ultimately what gets us there. But I stand by my previous comment that, right, we want that Black and brown communities can thrive, but have been systemically denied the opportunities in which. And so this runs across the gamut of all from financial lending. It goes back to this level of access and opportunity. And so I think the allyship, means unlocking those opportunities, using power and influence to make sure that, as Craig is mentioning here, this is not about just kind of old white men continuing to get rich, right? This is really about lifting communities.
I would just add, I completely agree with what you're saying, Adair. And I think, again, you referenced something early on that you said reparative. I must just say reparations and restitution and recompense, right? So I dropped into the chat, and I hope you all will take a chance to look at that. We have a cognitive dissonance as a nation, right? And I think Angela Davis says this, and I'm only referencing for people to go back and look at the quote if they want. But essentially what she says is that in the United States, we have a habit of forgetting history. And we think that that history, this is this thing that happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 100 years ago. And it stays inherently in its place, and that it doesn't somehow inhabit us, but history does inhabit us, right? It makes a difference. And actually some of our cities along the Mississippi River deal with this right now. It makes a difference if you're a part of a community that actually experiences natural disasters, for example, but that the national insurance industry will not insure your city. So really, really simple. And you might think, oh, okay, well, just, figure out a strategy. But what happens when your city is that's no longer insurable at a national or a federal level, at a state level, is actually a majority Black city, or a majority immigrant city, or a majority Native city? So all of a sudden we have the compounding factors of a national reality with the legacy of institutional racism and institutional anti-Blackness. And again, you'll hear me speak about it, not just because I'm Black, but because we have a very unique experience, just like our Native, for me, Native family, but for everybody, maybe Native cousins and brothers and sisters, right? There's a very unique experience if your people were literally forced to leave their homelands, think about what happened for the Japanese in internment camps. They were put on some of the, most infertile soil, and they actually grew incredible crops and made those habitable lands, and then they were moved away from them again, right? So there is something about as an industry and as a people who are in this country, no matter your citizenship status, understanding our deep history around the institutionalization of the structure that we're benefiting from now, or that we're being subjected to right now. And I always tell people, my mom was very young. My grandma was very young, between 80 and 66 between the two of them, right? My mother had water hoses let loose on her and dogs let loose on her by police. So that should tell all of us that we're not far removed from that country that was highly segregated, and not by choice. we're not far removed from that very intentional, complete eradication of successful Black communities, of successful immigrant communities. And so what I think, and how I approach my work is not in scarcity, it's not in blaming, but it's an understanding that actually we all have a cultural lineage. We all have a legacy that for many of us was pretty amazing. And that part of the opportunity in this moment that we're in, and certainly in the design world, is to reconnect to those rich histories. And as we do that, to build over, to almost like erase the damage that was done. Highway caps. People talk about highway caps all day. What's most amazing about a highway lid, or whatever we want to call that, is that we know that those expressways, highways, whatever they're called in your town, bifurcated largely cohesive Black and brown communities. Now that lid has an opportunity to reconnect if it's done well. So I think we can use design in that way, but we can't just forget our history.
Right. We have a question here from Laurie Becker, and maybe Todd or Bill, you want to take this on first. How are you planning for technology or broadband infrastructure improvements in your community to increase digital equity? Is this incorporated into your overall plans? So are we thinking about digital equity as well as we're thinking about economic opportunity and other things?
Well, that's a great question, Avi. Todd, maybe I'll jump in for, I think this, obviously with the pandemic and everybody kind of the sort of hybrid working from home and working, the sort of technology is all of a sudden kind of really leapt in our face. And I think specifically so when we talk about how do we still create an sort of an inclusive or equitable experience for everybody, whether I'm at home or whether I'm in the office, and can we actually do that just with technology? I don't know the answer. I know it can certainly help, but I think what we have learned, it's a tremendous connector, but it's also enables isolation in the same hand. So there's sort of a balance there that we need to orchestrate. I think it's what we've learned is that we know we always have to plan for technology. It seems to change as soon as we get it figured out. So I think creating more of a framework as an understanding for it rather than an actual solution, because it will change as soon as you think you've got it figured out. But it is an interesting question around can we be more connected with technology? And I think this pandemic has illustrated that it's not a level playing field. It is really it's sort of a haves and a haves not situation. So I think you have to think bigger about it.
In a very short-term sense, through the pandemic, I've been sort of impressed with the city's response and the availability and using the city's Wi-Fi network. My kids go to public schools in Minneapolis. I feel like in a very challenged circumstances, the district has tried to provide people, like with Chromebooks. The teachers are coming in and able to hand things out, even though they're really not supposed to within schools. So I've sort of felt like people, at least in the short term during what we've gone through with the pandemic, recognizing all the gaps that exist in access to technology, have tried to be proactive.
It is an important question because, we were just talking about how, history is not something far away. And this is an example of, a history of discrimination being created right in front of our eyes. Technology emerging as a new resource and immediately being able to see the inequity, in access to technology. One of our attendees asks, renting is just so temporal and builds no sense of community. Would municipalities consider assistance in a rent-to-own model in the form of encouragement to both the developer and the tenant? So when we're talking about residential, are we looking at rent-to-own as one of the solutions when we're talking about ownership, models in general?
We're looking at rent-to-own. We've been in conversation with major lending institutions. We've have been looking at modular housing. I would say though that I think about renting differently And I think if you ask a number of our long-term renters and neighbors in North Minneapolis, many of whom could even have purchased homes at different times, I don't know that they would all say that renting was devoid of community. I think they would, that like if there's community, there's community. It's not that renting is the barrier to community. I think the same would be so if you ask folks around our city, again, if there is actually community and connection. But we have been looking at rent to own. I will say when I was an executive director, I was surprised at the number of people whose families actually left them homes or left them property and they didn't want to be homeowners. So I think there is this question about like, you know, how we might be able to do more of New York style or a cooperative style of housing for people who maybe aren't interested in traditional single family home ownership, but they might be interested in condo ownership or townhomes or a cooperative ownership of a more of a community structure. But we're looking at it. I don't know, honestly, with the way the budget is going, and at the city, we've had unprecedented levels of funding actually invested into affordable housing. I don't know that we would have money anytime soon, if I'm just looking at how the state is moving, to actually incentivize a rent to own structure beyond what we currently do, which is about incentivizing a number of partners who support community members in getting into ownership.
I think this is a fascinating question about whether ownership drives community or not. I mean, there's plenty of examples of, I mean, ownership can help build equity financially, but I mean, there's plenty of people that just kind of always, you know, home up to the next, you know, it's not about community at all. It's just, I just want to build a nest egg through real estate. And so I think the issue of community is home ownership could be a big part, but it's not the definer, I don't think.
And really, community is fostered and built through the other infrastructures, right? And so, do we have that level of stability in our communities? Schools, community centers, churches, right? Those are the things that type of infrastructure, grocery stores, right, that foster and build community. And so, I think we need to be focusing on that type of infrastructure build out, because people who have especially Black and Brown communities, right, that have come through, you don't come through decades of oppression without forming a sense of community. and so people have that.
Katie Guyton asked, and this might be, I think, our last question of today. He asked, how have you all maintained successful community engagement and input during the COVID-19 pandemic? Can you share any key strategies or recommendations for equitable outreach? I think it's actually a great question, because as we know, you know, there's just so many barriers to reaching people when we're doing community work. And, you know, COVID-19 certainly has been the biggest barrier, temporary maybe, but, you know, ongoing barrier. So can we just talk about, you know, ways to get around that? How anything that all of you have done that has been successful?
I think COVID-19 has allowed, you know, across all industries, right, leaps in advances of leveraging and using technology that hopefully some of those things will stay. We're able to reach more individuals today through the power of technology, and using even social media as a platform of democratizing kind of these processes. And so I do believe that those are successful mechanisms of reaching community. People are able to, if they can't watch it in that moment, go back and engage at a later point. There are other continued pushes. I think we need to, one of the things that we're working on is hopefully bringing a documenters program here, which gets regular day citizens, if you will, trained in listening to public meetings and then telling it back out to their community. So that way, like more ways that we can remove the kind of technocratic language and processes of things and really make it accessible to communities will increase the level of engagement. And then the other thing that I'll offer as a successful community engagement tactic is that you have to go where the people are. Right. And if you expect them to come to you because you've built and like, why aren't people showing up? Right. People are preoccupied with like life. And so what I remember when we were building the store, we wanted to like engage the seniors next door, and our building is right next door. But rather than telling them to come over to our building, we held the meeting in their facility at an hour that most of them were downstairs. And so what are the ways that you can just reach people where they are and stop having them come to you and you go to them? And the last thing I'll add is the message matters, but the messenger matters also. And so the person that you put in front of community has to be a trusted partner, the institution. And so if you don't have that credibility, how do you can leverage organizations? You have to pay them, right? It's not free. The access is not free because you're using an institution's credibility to be able to reach the communities in which you don't have proximity to.
Yeah, Dare, I think we still have to meet people where they are. I think while technology is convenient, hey, we've got a Zoom call scheduled for 3 o'clock, you're all welcome. Just kind of won't get to everybody. And so it doesn't, there's no skip steps there. But, you know, sometimes it is, I've just recently joined the Minneapolis Planning Commission, and, you know, we're all virtual for planning commission meetings. And there's aspects of that works amazingly well. I mean, it's really incredible the amount of work. You can still get participation, but when you're not in the room, when you're not face to face with somebody and kind of understand, there's a translation issue that isn't just, I'm not picking up on Zoom, even in the tone of your voice and the way you carry yourself, the other messages that so technology is a piece of it. There's a connectivity issue there, but I think if we're really going to create stronger connections between people, we're not going to do it through a screen. We have to see each other.
Bill, to one final point, and I just want to emphasize or punctuate a point that was made, because I also think we have to view community as the experts. And if we are contracting any expert, then we're paying. And I believe, and we have a fundamental value in our organization, that we pay community for their time. If we're extracting information from them, that we figure out a way to compensate. And I know that at large scales, right, that doesn't necessarily work. But when we're doing these deep empathetic interviews and deep engagement with community, then we have to bake that in as a line item in our budget. Because these are experts, we're asking them for their opinions, we're asking them for their time, and we would do it with any other consultant that contracted with us. And so I implore everyone to see community as experts and figure out a way to compensate them for their efforts and for their knowledge about the communities in which you want to do work.
Well said.
That's a great note for us to end on there. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, we started out talking about, you know, we have to treat community, we have to go in with humility. I think you started us off on that note, and I think this is just full circle on that idea, right? To treat community as the experts. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, all of you, for all the insights and amazing sort of thoughts and perspectives that you shared with us today. It's been absolutely incredible listening to all of you, and I truly appreciate the time you've spent with all of us today. Thank you so much, Sean, Adair, Todd, and Bill, for a wonderful panel. Thanks, of course, to Gensler for hosting today's discussion and for making today's discussion possible. A big thanks also to our sponsors, Certainty, DuPont Tedlar, Roe, Kimball, Managed Commercial, and Versteel, for making today's discussion possible. A big thank you to our audience. We're seeing comments come in about how much they've enjoyed today's discussion. So thank you so much for being an engaged and you know, really participatory audience here. A quick note, equity is one of the many impact areas that we're tracking with our Planet Positive Awards program. If you haven't looked into it, I would urge all of you to please look into it. Metropolis is creating our first awards program around sustainability, and equity is a huge part of how we think about sustainable work. Please go ahead, go to metropolismac.com/Planet Positive Awards, or you can just visit our homepage, metropolismac.com. It's easy enough to find it from there. We'd love to see your projects come through, and we'd love to honor you for the work that you've done. Thank you all so much. Today's discussion will be archived on metropolismac.com at metropolismac.com/thinktank for you to return to whenever you would like to come back and listen to some of the amazing things our panelists said today. Thank you all so much again. I really appreciate the time you've spent with us and all the insights that you've shared. Have a great evening.